Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Courageous Conversations about our schools. I'm your host, Ken Feudernick, and today my guest is Willie Carver, who was a public high school English and French teacher from Kentucky, who just a year ago was selected from over 500 nominees as that state's Teacher of the Year.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Dr. Joe Biden, accompanied by Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona.
Willie, welcome to Courageous Conversations.
Thank you so much for having me. It really is a pleasure.
So now, just over a year after receiving that recognition and going to the White House with 49 other Teachers of the Year from other states, you decide to leave the classroom because of what it has been like lately for you as an openly gay teacher and for many LGBTQ students at your school. I know quitting the profession is not something you're happy about, and our listeners will want to know more about what led to that decision and where you go from here. But for now, let's start at the beginning. Let's hear the story of your growing up, being a student yourself, deciding to become a teacher, and then the story that ultimately led to your decision to leave public education.
I still feel warm in my heart when I think of school. I can still smell my kindergarten class, Play-Doh and dirt, and it was right up against a hill in the mountains. And we could go outside and play up against the side of the hill. School was where we grew beans in styrofoam cups and had little bean plants. Everything about it just to me seemed magical. I have a really clear memory of our teacher reading a story and just realizing how big the world is. That there's these beautiful people in faraway places, and slowly coming to the realization that I'm in the same world as them and that I can go see these beautiful people and beautiful things in faraway places. School was a promise. It was a hope that I could make it to those beautiful places, right? There was a lot of chaos around me as a kid. And so having a place with not just structure in the rule-based sense, but structure in that something has meaning and purpose and it's leading somewhere. That plant's going to grow. The story's going to have an ending. I'm going to learn to read. So school was always this beautiful, warm place for me, such that I'd literally, until this year, never asked the question, what am I going to be when I grow up? Because it was obvious. If there's a way that I can stay in school, I'm going to do that. I was a teacher to my sister, to my cat, to my dog, to our stuffed animals. What's beautiful about teaching, it's not really about having information and giving someone information. That's the wrong approach. It's about seeing someone in front of you and recognizing what they can be, seeing the wildest potential in them, and then finding every damn way you can do it to get them there. And my teachers did that for me. It's something I've always wanted to do. When I see people, that's what I want to do. Whether I'm in the classroom or not in the classroom, if I see someone who needs help at the grocery store, it's the same thing. What does that person need, and how can I give them something to help them fulfill that aspect of themselves? And I had beautiful teachers. Very proud graduate of Floyd County Schools. That district does phenomenal work at making students feel valued and loved. We're talking about a district that doesn't necessarily have all the funds or resources of other districts that Bill Gates has visited to see how they do what they do because students are so successful. We're talking about a school district that gives every single student a computer and a really nice backpack. They think about what kids need. They speak their language. And my teacher spoke my language. As a matter of fact, when I won Teacher of the Year, my first instinct was to start naming them and thanking them, thanking my kindergarten teacher, my first grade teacher, my second grade teacher. And I realized right around fifth or sixth grade, I'm going to take up all the governor's time saying this, so I have to stop. But my next action was to actually write a thank you to each one of them openly and try to find them on social media as best I could. Some of the stories that stand out, I found what I thought was a dinosaur in my backyard as a kid. I called my fourth grade teacher Mrs. Donna Gray, a beautiful, lovely, lovely human being, who was always so soft and decent with us. And I called and said, hey, I looked it up in the phone book, found her last name, scrolled down, called and said, I have a fossil. And she said, well, bring it in. So we brought it in, and she helped me make little lines on a big piece of paper so that we could take pictures of it. We sent it off to some professors. We cleaned it. And then they were so sweet. The professor sent back some information about how it was a horse skull. Because I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. Of course, there was a random horse buried in the backyard. But I kind of, even by fourth grade, was like, you knew the whole time this was a horse, didn't you? And she said, what I knew was that you were a scientist. That extra work to really build people up. That was my experience in school. I knew there was always someone who was going to protect me and take care of me in school. So school was always a lovely place. Even when it wasn't, school was a lovely place.
That's the kind of teacher you became, is someone who would make sure that your students knew they were cared for and accepted.
I think my primary goal was always for them to see themselves as I saw them. I hope that's what every student walked away with. I think that's my goal with all human beings. A story that just stands out. First year actually teaching public school, I had a boy, we'll call him Jamie. Used to walk to school. It was one of those weird conundrums where you're not supposed to pick a kid up, but I would walk past a ninth grader in the rain. What do you do, right? I'm not going to say whether I picked him up or not, but I certainly didn't want a kid walking in the rain to school. We did a project at the end of the year. He was in French 1. Love his heart, terrible at French. I don't know if he learned a single word in French, but I had them do projects. And so I was like, Jamie, you can do anything you want. The whole goal is immerse yourself in French culture. So pick anything on planet Earth. And then you just have to do it too, whatever the French are doing or French speaking people. So he wanted to try art. He'd never painted before. I was like, great. So we flipped through an art book and he found some Impressionist work and had never heard of Impressionism. So I get him some paint. I get him a canvas. And the boy had hidden genius. He came in unable to speak. It was such a beautiful painting of a fire and sort of the side of a barn. And he said, well, Impressionists took things from their day-to-day life, and they took simple things, and they tried to find places of simple beauty. And he said, well, I don't have any beautiful places in my life. Whew, sorry, it's been years. But he said, I don't have any beautiful places in my life, but when my parents fight, I like to go out and burn stuff behind the barn. So I wanted to paint that. And he did this Impressionist painting. I hope I told Jamie enough what he was capable of. I hope he walked out of that class realizing he had something that he didn't know he had. That's what I want people to walk away with. I don't care if they learn French. I want them to learn it, which is my love. English is my love. But if they walk away believing that they can do something, that matters more than any content you can give them.
So Willie, roughly 10, 12 years ago, you started teaching high school in Kentucky, and your administrators and people in your community knew you were a gay teacher, and you got some early warnings about being open about it. What was that like then? But you managed to get through a number of years quite well until things changed.
I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. I grew up in America. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. I did not expect things to be easy. But the trick that I used was twofold. One, to without question insist upon my dignity. I thought I will borrow from what I know from Appalachians, and I will. My dad said it in a much more vulgar way, but he said, if you're going to be gay, you have to walk into every room like you're the tallest person. So I said, I'm going to walk into every room like I belong, and I will force other people to absolutely make it clear that I don't before I will believe that. I will assume that they all love me because there's no other way I can do this and survive. And it was some work. Some of the early things I remember, something as simple as carrying a canvas bag. I still do. I carry them all over the place. I feel like we're always getting them from places. I had colleagues in my first year pull me to the side and literally tell me, like, you're not going to get a job again if you keep doing this. And I'm like, because I'm carrying a because it somehow looks feminine, because somehow that upsets people. My first teaching job, my supervising teacher, I loved it, a tough old bird, pulled me to the side and said, she was crying, and she said, well, they didn't renew your position, did they? And they had said something like, we don't have the funding. And I said no. And then she was saying, I'm so sorry. I knew this would happen. And she was crying. And even then I knew, obviously, I'm an openly gay man and they didn't want me. But I tried to save face. I thought, in a weird way, they lied to me and said that it was a funding issue. So I thought, I'll go with that. I will tell myself that. The next year, I was finishing my master's, and that was the year that I couldn't hold up that facade any longer. I was pulled aside really early on and asked, are you openly gay? And I said, yes. I picked this town because it's close to Lexington, Kentucky, which had an openly gay mayor at the time. So I thought, I'll be okay. It's sort of like the Vermont, New Hampshire effect. Like, all the conservatives sort of push out and into one direction. So I ended up in one of the most conservative places in the state. And this administrator said, you will be crucified and no one will protect you. I won't protect you. And the problem with it is I had to have a signature from an administrator in order to get my license. That's the way the master's works. So I thought, this isn't an issue of my dignity or making an assumption anymore, because they have the literal power not to sign. And then I don't have a life. So I had to go into the closet for the first time in my life, after having come out at least. I wouldn't go outside with my husband. I gained 75 pounds. I was miserable, except for when I was in the classroom, because it was always that safe place. And in my classroom, I don't know, we were dancing to Lady Gaga and learning French, and the kids were great. The parents were great. It was a really good experience outside of the fact that I could not really be me. So we hightailed it to Vermont. We had about $300 in the bank. Had no clue exactly what we were going to do. I left my job before I knew that I was going to get a job. And I just said, this is one of those times I'm going to beg the universe to just catch me, and I'm going to jump. But we realized that we really liked the South. I think specifically for me, the rural South, because I know it is a place that is overlooked. It is a place where there are kids who can do so much. Wonderful kids who are telling themselves from the day that they walk in, the school isn't for them, who are telling themselves the day they walk in that they don't really have a place. And I don't think there's a lot in our national conversation about poor rural Americans. Even the most progressive and liberal people mock them. Interestingly enough, I ended up right back at the same high school. My husband and I had realized, we really don't want to be in the Northeast. And my husband said, where would you go? Because at that point I had amassed a bunch of teaching licenses. Alabama, North Carolina, Guam. I don't know what to do. And my husband said, don't think, just say, where would you teach if you could teach anywhere? And I said, Montgomery County High School. I love those kids. I love the community. I just wish it could be different. And I kid you not, that very same day I get a phone call from the new principal who said, I heard about what happened to you. I would love for you to come back. And I went back. And he was there for a couple of years, and I was successful. But it's weird when you talk about homophobia, because you inherit the status quo. And what feels normal in one year eventually doesn't feel normal anymore. It's not normal, it's not fair, it's not right that we don't say that we're gay in school. It's not normal or fair to the students that we can't even read something by an LGBTQ person. It's not normal or fair that we can't have an LGBTQ affirming group or a gay straight alliance. It's not normal or fair that we don't have pride flags. And so I did what I always did, and I thought, okay, I'm going to start insisting. I'm going to put these flags up. I'm going to read these stories. I did come back as the big gay teacher, but I started seeing that my students needed to be who they were as well. And it's one thing for me to insist upon my dignity, but I had to create this new work of insisting on their dignity. And that's when the pushback really got severe. Because suddenly we're talking about kids who are LGBTQ. And people don't want to have that conversation. People don't want to talk. So their groups started causing me to have to go have meetings about what was appropriate. And again, we're not talking about them doing anything other than teaching themselves LGBTQ history, or them cleaning up parks, or them wanting to do research. But suddenly it was an issue. And then my coping strategies weren't working. Because it's one thing if someone's harming me, it is another thing altogether if someone's harming a student. Which led to this year in which things were such that I really couldn't return.
Willie, talk a little bit about the conditions that led you to decide to ultimately leave your high school after all those years, and your reflections on that choice and how you feel about having made it. I have to believe that there's a sense of sadness and regret about no longer being in the classroom.
There absolutely is. Like I said, I'm still trying to figure out now what I want to be, because that's all I ever wanted to be. But the year started with my students wanting to do a survey on mental health. They had seen many of their classmates attempt suicide. They knew the national statistics, and they were scared. And they thought we could do better. So they said, their idea, what can we do? And I said, well, there's a group called the Kentucky Student Voice team. Let's see how they are doing surveys. So we start with them, and they learn about the ethnographic studies. They learned about quantitative studies. They learned about research and how to do these appropriately. So then I said, okay, they created a survey, and I said, well, let's meet with some researchers. So I got them in contact with some researchers at the University of Kentucky who talked to them about how to make sure that their questions were fair, how to make sure that anyone participating was doing so in an ethical way, etc. It was beautiful. It was beautiful seeing these kids tackle an issue head on. And their first step was to meet with the Department of English at the high school. They created a presentation about why it was important for us to do a climate survey. They presented about the heavy tax of homophobia, the suicide rate of trans youth, and why it is so important to have inclusion. The entire English department agreed this was a worthwhile cause. All of us said that we would share their survey as an option in class. So no mandatory survey doing, no time in class where they have to do it, just an optional survey in class. This led to some of the most ridiculous insults, yelling. I had literally an administrator slam a door, say that we were shoving gay stuff down people's throats, and ultimately ban this survey. A little survey, and that's when you see kids hopeful for change when things aren't going well, and you see adults erase their hope. Kids who are already not doing so well, kids who are already facing so much, and who despite all of that are hopeful. When you take away their tools and their means to help themselves, it was inexcusable. And it really made me start to think about how much can you do within a system, right? You could, I hate to use a comparison like this, but if you're in Nazi Germany, I guess to some extent you could be the good Nazi who's trying to work within the system and make the system not be what it is. But at a certain point when the system is so toxic and so corrupt, you can't be a good one, right? You can't really be a part of it. And I really started to think, is this a system that is sustainable for me? For my mental health, for my kids' mental health. I got to meet the president, which was beautiful and cool and great. The day before I meet the president, I get a phone call from the only other queer colleague I have in my department, who said they had suspended her for 2 weeks for doing some sort of TikTok thing where she mimed a song, or I don't do TikTok, but she had mimed a song that had the F word in it. Imagine. On a private account, too. And so they suspended her for 2 weeks. This happened a week after another teacher in Kentucky had to deal with death threats and was suspended for telling kids, "You're okay. You are free to be yourself with me." I actually had a board made of his board. The rhetoric, the anti-LGBTQ nature of things was so high. And so I thought about this colleague, how they told her she wasn't allowed to communicate with anyone at work, even though she clearly was. And I just thought, I can't do this anymore. And I tweeted about it, and I think I immediately went to sleep. And then woke up, and there were 65,000 people who had responded to that tweet, because I think there was something human in it, I guess. I still don't really know what happened, because usually in a room of 10 people, I can't get half to agree with me. But in that moment, people agreed. And interestingly, when I get back from D.C., before I even got home, a previous teacher of the year, who was also LGBTQ from another state, calls me and says, "Hey, we need to talk." And he said, "Things could get more dangerous for you." And he talked to me about some of the experiences that he had. And literally, before we get off the phone, I get a text from, again, those parents that we're not communicating with. I get a text from one of those parents who says, you need to see this. And a community member was spreading all kinds of horrific lies about me, and my students. So this woman probably has mental health issues. She was somehow saying that our group was a feeder group for a sex cult, that I was grooming these students. She started naming students who had just graduated and claiming that they were acting as liaisons and were grooming younger students. She was doxing them, putting pictures of them online, putting their jobs, pictures of them at work online. She was citing me with quotation marks, but it wasn't anything I'd ever said, but making it look as if I had said things. Going to board meetings and saying these things. Parents were very afraid. They were emailing me saying that, is there anything that can be done? I emailed the superintendent and said, I'm very afraid right now. Her posts were being shared almost 100 times. It's a small community. I got extra security cameras around my house, and his response was effectively, because I can't quote it, I don't see any reason to be afraid. If you're afraid, call the police. I said, can you just say something? What I really thought would have been nice, there's a bass fishing club at that school. I know because they tweet about them every other day. Great. Cool for the bass fishing club. My group has never had the school tweet about them. My group has never been included in any school communication. So I thought it would have been nice to say, hey, you know what the kids are doing this week? They're cleaning up a park for free in their spare time. Do you know what they were doing last week? They were raising money for mental health awareness. I got nothing. The response was something to the effect of, we can't intervene every time a parent has a complaint, despite the fact that parents are emailing. I realized then, okay, I already realized people don't want me to be here. I already realized that people are making decisions that are harming my students. And now we're at the effect of, you are literally in danger because no one's coming to your defense. No one was coming to the defense of the teacher who I talked about earlier, or the other queer colleague who also resigned from her job and left K through 12 education. It was her entire life's work. Her biggest hurdle was that she had to call her grandfather, who's 98, and say, I'm not a teacher anymore. Like, her biggest emotional hurdle was that he would not be proud of her anymore. We're in a teacher shortage. LGBTQ individuals are twice as present in K through 12 education than in the regular population. I think for a lot of us, it's because we want to rewrite that narrative. And the cowardice of administrators who would rather not do anything, even if it potentially leads to harm, in order not to have to take a position, is the problem. You know, it all basically came to fruition while I'm meeting the president. And that it was such an emotional moment, as it would be for anyone. I had a father the night before write me on Twitter, I think. He said, "I don't know why I'm writing you, but my kid tried to share something about himself and wore a little pride pin to school. And the teachers made them take it off. And the dad said, this is the first time in my life I don't know how to heal the wound. This is the first time in my life when I don't know what to do." And I said, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to talk to the president about. I'm going to talk about this kid. So I bought a card. I had no idea what I was doing. I bought a card for this kid from the president, wrote a note, then wrote a letter explaining what I was trying to do, and thought, if I catch Biden, maybe he'll sign this and I can give this to the kid. So it is word vomit in the few minutes I get to meet him. And Dr. Biden actually says, "Willie, we know about your work. Advocating for kids is everything we need here." And I go, yeah. So she takes it and says, "I promise we'll take care of this." And they did. They literally sent this kid a letter from the president explaining how important it is to share, even if it doesn't work out, and sharing stories of trying to share themselves. It was an emotional time. And I'm sitting, meeting the president, meeting Congress people, and the whole time thinking, I'm here with the Teachers of the Year, and I don't think I can be a teacher anymore. I don't think I can do this. And we were fortunate to be in the audience of 3 TED Talks. One was by, I believe her name is Becky Oglesby, and she is a Teacher of the Year who actually survived a tornado with students. She tells it so beautifully, but she talks about having this moment when she kept thinking, no, it's not really happening, it's not really happening, and then she realizes it's happening. And she's in the bathroom with them and huddled around them, and the walls start lifting away from the school. And I just had this thought, damn it, I have been in a storm with these kids for 15 years, huddled around them, and I think the walls are coming, and I feel like I'm running out of this place. But I don't know how much longer I can stand it. And that's sort of how I'm trying to see this. I think I've been in the mud trying to hold kids up, and it's just getting deeper. So my goal now is to get somewhere high up so that I can start lifting them better, so that I can start drying up that mud. That's my goal.
After hearing Willie's story, I reached out to former students. I was curious to know what their experience was like having him as their teacher.
My name is Lara Helene. I was a student of Mr. Carver's from freshman year of high school to senior year of high school, both as a French student and an English student. And now I am a full-time musician. Yeah, so Carver is not only my favorite teacher of all time, like the best teacher I ever had, period. No debate on that. But he's just someone that became like very early on a sort of touchstone in my life to go back to when I think about like what kind of person I want to be and like what I want to do in the world and how I want to be in the world. And I actually got to know him a little bit before I even started high school. I think I met him when I was like 13 or 14 at this open mic that they used to have in Mount Sterling, and I would go and like play music, and he was just very supportive of me even before I was a student, like very supportive of my music, very excited to like see my career grow and like support me in any way that he could. And then when I actually got to have him in school, it was like your freshman year you have an option to take Spanish or French, and he was the only French teacher. And so I was like, well, obviously I'm going to take French. And very early on, like, obviously realized that he was queer. Like, I met his husband the same day that I met him the first time. And he was, I think at that point, the only out queer person that I knew in Mount Sterling. I can't think of a single other one. I can't even think of one now there, like of people that still live there, who is like actually out, at least as far as like people that I think of as real life adults, you know? So yeah, he was just, I found that really, really encouraging. At the time that I met him, I was like deeply in the closet, very much in a Catholic phase. It was bad. And like, I've since talked to Carver about it, and he was like, oh honey, like I knew you were gay, like right from the start. Like obviously I knew. So he just kind of became like a real like anchor in my life, and someone to look up to, and someone like, once I, you know, was enrolled in his classes, I spent a lot of time in high school ditching classes to go sit in Carver's room. Like, regardless of whether he was teaching or just like hanging out, like I just wanted to be close to that energy. And, you know, I was a student who like the teachers didn't care to let me kind of like go do what I wanted. I was kind of like a teacher's pet a little bit, but only for the sake of like being able to go hang out with Carver. As far as like actually having him in class, from day one, you are immersed in French. Like, he is like teaching in French right from the start. He has done all of this like research about how the brain works and like how students best learn, and like it works. His teaching methods are a little bit unconventional sometimes, but like so incredibly effective. Even like 2 years out of high school, I'm still fluent in French, and I haven't taken any beyond that, and that is 100% because of Carver. So much of the best parts of high school for me had to do with Carver. I've been carrying this weight so long, I've forgotten what it is to feel free. These facts I know about my life, but they don't add up to me. Yes, they don't add up.
My name's Michaela Ferguson, and I had Mr. Carver in the years 2017 to 2019 for French 1 and French 2. He has always went above and beyond for his kids, not only educational-wise, but in our personal lives. He's always made sure that we had everything we needed and we were okay emotionally. And he's always tried to put a deeper connection between his students, and he was amazing for that. Well, I know I had a lot of personal issues going on at home with like my grandmother and parents and whatnot, and I was like 16 to 18, so I was struggling a lot with my emotions and depression, anxiety, and I knew I could always go to him and talk to him about anything, and he would 100% be behind me, supporting me and helping me get through whatever I needed to get through. And when I didn't have that anywhere else. I have a daughter, and she is my world. But he really did help me transition into that new life of being on my own and kind of taking more independence. He helped me with the struggles I had with just feeling like I wouldn't be able to do it. And he gave me a lot of confidence that I lacked.
Hi, my name is Jackson Campbell. I live in New York City. I attend Union Theological Seminary, and I was a student of Mr. Carver's between 2015 and 2018. When I came in 2015 into the high school, I had been discerning a lot about my identity and my sexuality and just how to express myself, which a lot of people do coming out of middle school. But Mr. Carver's classroom was kind of a, I don't like to use the word safe space. I think it was more of like a brave space to be bold and to be who you are. And I always remember his room being a place where I could just kind of lay aside those masks or whatever that we put on throughout the day, and we could just be who we are and who we seek to become. At the time when I came to high school, I lived in a more conservative home, and sexuality conversations about that was just not acceptable at the time, and that went the same for school and for church. If I said anything to anybody about who I was, it was going to become an issue. And so one place I could do that was his room. It was not, it wasn't a concern to him, and it wasn't going to be something that he was going to go tell other people. His room was just a place where you could come and be yourself and not worry about that. And that even goes for people outside of the LGBTQ community. We had a lot of people, including myself, who felt like those we call the misfits. And we were able to just come to his room and take a breather, regardless of academia and learning. It was also just a place to exist.
Willie, what's the way out of this? I ask that with genuine, heartfelt sense of curiosity myself. I've been created this podcast, Courageous Conversations about Our Schools, and I've had a number of conversations with people about indoctrination, critical race theory, gender identity, and now this one with you. And what I've tried to do when we have people with different points of view on the line together with each other is to get people to agree in advance that they will listen to each other and be respectful. Do you think there are opportunities at, say, your school, and maybe it's too late now or it's too hot, but do you think there's a way on the ground in local schools for people, parents and teachers, to come in and have conversations where they really listen to each other, and could that make a difference?
I read last night, Pew just put out its newest data. Things are not looking great. We hate each other as a country. Every potential negative qualifying word, distrustful, ugly, mean, things like that. Most Democrats at 80% or so think that of Republicans, and vice versa. What I know is people are not bad. People are good. People are fearful. I don't know that we're going to reach any resolution personally by having conversations together, because I think both sides have already determined what they think the other side thinks. What we have to figure out how to do is to bring down the fear. And we could try that at the local level. We should be trying it at the local level. But at the end of the day, this is an issue of national rhetoric. The person who called me a groomer didn't call me a groomer out of a vacuum. She called me a groomer because Marjorie Taylor Greene says that gay teachers are groomers. She called me a groomer because DeSantis and the people working with him say this about us. And I'm perfectly happy criticizing both sides. But I think right now, this is an issue of parts of conservatism, and I think it's a minority part, using fear to cause destruction. And I think who we have to reach are those 70% of conservatives who don't think like this, but who are afraid of losing that 30%. So the question is, how can we with decency navigate that conversation? I just had a conversation with a friend yesterday who I love, who was talking about feeling uncomfortable when kids in a very young class, second grade, ask about LGBTQ issues, like, does someone have two daddies? And says, I really want that to be something that families talk about. And I immediately said, here's the thing. When you don't speak, there are kids in that room who probably already think that they're LGBTQ, who are probably already thinking that, or who may know or who have LGBTQ families, and our hesitance to speak might cause them harm. But then I also appreciated the fact that this person said, but I want to be kind to people's cultures, and I want those parents who want to have those conversations themselves to have that opportunity. So what I can recognize is we were able to say, maybe we were actually able to troubleshoot some ways that she could effectively have both conversations. That she could say the minimum, for example, without shaming, and we were able to reach a resolution. People on two opposite ends of this extreme, so dealing with the national rhetoric can help us have those more freely.
Well, Willie, I want to thank you so much for several things. One is for honoring the teaching profession and being such a bright light for so many students and other educators and even parents, like the one whose child came to your class and the parent didn't know what to do. I want to thank you for your courage in speaking the way that you do about your experience and about the experiences of your colleagues and your students, and at some peril, because you've been the recipient of some pretty harsh efforts to discredit you and worse. And still here you are today, 2022, still speaking out about the importance of being good teachers and what it means to really be an American that's open to all people and the open heart that you have towards people on both sides of this issue. I appreciate it so much, and I think our listeners will as well. So I want to thank you, Willie, for being part of this podcast.
Thank you. It's an absolute honor, and the hardest part of this is not reliving of the emotions. Like I said, it's that there are so many worse stories that aren't mine to tell, stories I wish I could tell. And when people want to give me sympathy or love, I feel guilty about it because I think there's so many more people who need it. But I also know the way I eliminate stories like theirs is talking more. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to help contribute to that system.
Listeners to our Courageous Conversations About Our Schools podcast, you can find all of our conversations at schoolconversations.org and on most podcasting platforms. Again, thank you to my guest, Willie Carver from Kentucky. So long, everyone.